Our story begins in 1974, in the heart of small-town America. Laurel, Indiana was a quiet place, a community of just a few hundred people where everyone knew their neighbors and life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. It was here that a young woman named Lula Ann Gillespie-Miller was starting her life. At just 28 years old, she was a mother to 3 young children, all born in quick succession. A daughter in 1969, another in 1970, and a son in 1971. From the outside, it may have seemed like a classic American life. But for Lula, the reality was different. She felt overwhelmed by motherhood, the pressures of raising 3 children under the age of 5, in an era with different societal expectations and support systems, had become an unbearable weight. She felt trapped, ill-equipped for the life she was living. And one day, in January of 1975, she made a decision that would change her family forever. She simply vanished, leaving her 3 young children behind. The only trace of her was a handwritten note she left for her parents. It was not a promise to return, but a declaration of surrender. In it, she reportedly wrote that she felt she was, quote, too young to be a mother. And in that same note, she legally signed her children over to the care of her own parents. With what little money she had, Lula Ann Gillespie walked away from her home, her children, and her entire identity. Her parents, stunned, held on to the hope that their daughter would eventually come back. But days turned into weeks, and the silence from Lula was absolute. Realizing this was not a temporary escape, they officially reported her missing to the Laurel police, beginning a search that would soon go cold, leaving behind only questions. What drives a mother to leave everything she knows? And where could she possibly have gone? For her family, it was the beginning of an agonizing silence that would stretch for over 4 decades. The year was 1975, and in the quiet community of Laurel, Indiana, people didn't just disappear. Life was predictable, stable, and built on the foundation of family. But Lula Ann Gillespie-Miller had done exactly that. She had stepped out of her life, leaving a void that would pull her family into a decades-long search for answers. In the early days, the investigation was a local affair. Laurel police distributed missing person flyers, spoke to the few neighbors who knew Lula, and followed up on scant leads that quickly went nowhere. With no signs of foul play and a note suggesting she left willingly, the case soon lost its urgency and was filed away, officially becoming a cold case. For the outside world, the story faded. But for the 3 young children left behind, it was a wound that would never heal. Raised by their grandparents, they grew up in the shadow of a mother who was a ghost, a question mark at the center of their lives. Her daughter Tammy, in particular, refused to let her mother's memory fade into a cold case file. As she grew from a child into a young woman, the search for her mother became a defining part of her identity. She spent countless hours scouring online forums and the new digital missing persons databases that emerged with the rise of the internet. With each passing year, the hope of finding Lula alive seemed to dim. The 1970s became the 1980s, a decade of new music and new fashion. But for Tammy, it was another 10 years of silence. The 1990s brought the digital age, and still, there was no trace of Lula Ann. The family lived with a unique and constant heartbreak, a confusion that gnawed at them for over 4 decades. They were stuck in a state of limbo, unable to mourn and unable to move on. The questions haunted them, changing as the years went by. At first it was, where did she go? Then it became, is she okay? And finally, the most painful question of all, is she still alive? For 42 years, that question hung in the air, unanswered. For decades, the case of Lula Ann Gillespie-Miller was little more than a dusty file, a collection of fading flyers and dead-end reports. But in 2014, a new state mandate in Indiana required law enforcement to re-examine their oldest cold cases, breathing new life into forgotten investigations. Lula's file landed on the desk of Detective Sergeant Scott Jarvis of the Indiana State Police. Jarvis was a seasoned investigator with a passion for giving names back to the nameless and answers to the forgotten. He began his work with a tool unimaginable in 1975, the internet. Using modern databases like the Doe network, he began a methodical search. His first lead was the case of an unidentified Jane Doe, whose body had been found in Texas back in 1976. While that woman was ultimately proven not to be Lula, the investigation had an unintended consequence. It firmly pointed Jarvis's attention towards the state of Texas. He traced records, cross-referenced identities, and followed digital breadcrumbs. The trail eventually led him to a woman with a similar identity who had been living a quiet life in a small town in southern Texas. Her name was Connie Miller, but it was another detail that made Detective Jarvis certain he was on the right path. The town she had previously lived in was named Laurel, Texas. The coincidence that a woman matching Lula's description would move from Laurel, Indiana to a town with the same name hundreds of miles away was too significant to ignore. Working with the Texas Rangers, Jarvis confirmed that Connie Miller's date of birth matched Lula's. The search was narrowing. After 42 years of silence, they had a name and an address. On a quiet morning, Texas Rangers approached the woman they believed was Lula Ann Gillespie. When confronted with the evidence of her true identity, with the facts of a life she had left behind nearly half a century ago, the woman known as Connie Miller finally admitted the truth. "I am Lula Ann Gillespie," she said. After 42 years, the mystery of where she went was solved. The discovery of Lula Ann Gillespie-Miller should have been the end of the story. A joyful reunion 42 years in the making. But the discovery brought an unexpected and heartbreaking revelation. Detective Jarvis had the difficult task of delivering the news to Lula's daughter, Tammy. He had to explain that after decades of searching, her mother had been found alive and well. But in the same breath, he had to tell her that Lula had started a new life, a new family, and had made it clear that she chose not to reconnect with the children she had left behind. The reunion her family had hoped for, the closure they had prayed for, would never happen. For them, the answer to the question of where was immediately replaced by a more painful and perhaps unanswerable question. Why? Lula had chosen her path and would not be swayed from it. The case was officially closed, but the emotional mystery for her children remained wide open. The profound mystery of her decision remains. What drives someone to leave everything behind and never look back, even when given the chance? Perhaps we can never truly understand the deep and often unknowable reasons people make life-altering choices. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the answers we find are not the ones we were looking for. Some mysteries are solved, but the human heart remains the greatest mystery of all.